Now we're going to do the platter. We're going to use a slightly bigger piece of clay. Let's make sure this thing. Okay. Now again, if you can learn to wedge so that you can make a shape that looks like this, you'll be so much happier and you'll work so much less once you get this on the wheel. So you put it in the center of the wheel, you press down, you seal the edge. Start the wheel. Remember the mantra, wet your hands. Wet the piece. Let's put this over here. Wet your hands, wet the piece. Wet your hands again. Do the first technique. Push, push, pull. Or more accurately, maybe it's push, push, squeeze. Push, push, squeeze. That's going up. Now you wet your hands. You wet the piece. Wet your hands again. Now, going down is push, pull, and then press down here. And when you go down, you only have a limited amount of time while the clay is still slippery. It usually works out to about 6 or 7 seconds. So I wet the piece and wet my hands, push, pull, press 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. After about 7 seconds, the clay is now dry and sticky. And although you're much bigger than the clay, and you can push it around, you're best served to just 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and at 7, ease off. No matter what you do after 7, you're going to create more problems than you are solving. It's really hard. It's hard to really need to emphasize how important these fingertips are on your dominant hand. When you get close to the bottom, you can go and get your rib and just clean off a little bit of that. That actually helps everything. All right, this is almost there. You see that little eccentric down there? I'm going to try and get rid of that before I start the process. So we're going to come in here, and the only way you can get rid of that little eccentric is by the pull on this hand. So we go in here, we pull that. If you take it all the way up and all the way down, and it's just a little bit off, you have to take it back up, but you don't have to take it all the way up. You can just take it up enough just to get control of it. And I really can't overemphasize how important these fingers are, pulling back. Pushing on it and pushing on it is just not going to solve the problem. Especially when we have about 6 pounds of clay here. So this is more clay than we were using for the bowl or the cylinder. And I put more clay in because it gives me greater opportunity to demonstrate. All right, so if your eyes are sharp, you can see that this is not perfect, but it's good enough. All right, so now we have to make a platter or a plate. In order, we have to make the base wide. You can get up here and push a little bit and flatten it down. But if you really want to flatten it out more, here's the technique that you use. You open it just a little bit. You take that opening and you push it to the side just a little bit. About halfway between the middle and the edge. And you get on top and push that down. And all of a sudden, the piece is wider. Open it a little bit. Take that mound that you've created, push it over, about halfway between the middle and the edge. Wet your hands, wet the piece, wet your hands, get on top, and push it down. You can see what's happening now. The piece is widening out. And every time you do the technique, you end up with this stuff, slip. This is what you need primarily to lubricate your piece when you're throwing. Water won't do it. You can't just keep throwing water at it. If you throw water at it, all you do is wash the slip away. What you want is the slip. Then we open it a little bit. We take this over. And as the piece gets lower and lower, you take the ridge over just a little bit more. And when you're taking the ridge over, I can really explain this now, is that your weaker hand, your inside hand, and for right-hander people, this is your left hand. This is pushing the clay over like this. Your first finger is pushing the clay over. Your other fingers are just kind of coming along behind there and pressing the middle down and telling your hand where the bottom is. This side, okay, so the wall is being pushed over. As the wall is being pushed over, it rises up. If you let it go of its own course, that wall will rise up and eventually break off. So what you want to do is be on top of that wall with your right hand and press down. And then once you have it over, spread it out. You can see what's happening here. This mass of clay that was centered and sort of equal distance high and equal distance wide is now turning into a wide, flat disc. And this is the same technique that you will use for actually making the plate. And this is the technique you use for a plate, whether it's a little lunch plate or whether it's a large platter. If you want to learn how to use a plate, how to throw a plate, then the best thing to do is start with 2 pounds of soft clay and try this technique. And here I go, I'm going to move some more clay out. Get over here and flatten it down. So this technique is really easy on the shoulders and the wrists. If you try some of the other techniques that you might see on the web or in books, where you're kind of on the top and trying to muscle the whole thing down, that's really, really hard on your lower back and your shoulders and your wrists. Okay. Open this. Move it over. Okay, so now, as far as I'm concerned, we have the disc as wide as we need it. We're not going to widen it anymore. we're going to use the same technique that we used to make the disc to create the inside of the plate. So what we're going to do now, instead of moving clay out and flattening it down, we're moving clay out and we're just parking it on the outside. And as the piece gets wider, you'll probably instinctively start slowing the wheel down. So the trick here is keeping this as flat as possible. Try not to make the base extend out any further, because what you're really trying to do is get clay to come from here and in a wave type motion come all the way out to here. If you do this technique and you get all the clay moved out, and by the time you get all the clay moved out, you find out you don't have any clay left on the rim. That's because you allowed it to spread. So at this point, you want to stop the wheel, take your pin tool, and just figure out how much clay do you have there. All right, so that's about 1/2 inch. That's about 1/2 inch, so but fairly even. So for a platter this size, 1/2 inch is the thickest you want it, and 3/8 of an inch is the thinnest you want it. So I'm going to take it. I'm going to do a couple more pulls here. So here we have this form is pretty much finished between here and here. Really not much more work we're going to do here. So we're down to about 3/8 of an inch. So we're done. We're done with this part of the form. Now we have to worry and we have to work on the outer part of the form. So we're going to take this big roll of clay here. We're going to squeeze it. And transform this low roll that we have on the outside into a kind of a high, thick wall. Now, remember, at this point, when you were spreading your piece, centrifugal force was your friend, because centrifugal force helps you move the clay out and to the side here. Now you have to negotiate with the centrifugal force to get the form you want, because you don't want the centrifugal spinning of the wheel to take over your form and make it just flop out. So now we've demarcated the inside of the form. So this part, our plate or platter, is pretty much done between here and here. All we have to do is figure out what we're going to do here. And it's just as with all throwing, at all times, you want your wall to be inside the final form, so that the last thing you do is stretch it out to the final form. So we're just going to come in here and we're going to bring this wall up. Now when you do this move, your outside fingers are doing all the work. And you want your wheel to be moving pretty slowly at this point, because you have a lot of mass out here and it's some distance from the center. And if you spun this wheel very quickly, this whole thing will just go zip and fly right out. Now we're just going to bring it out here like this. All right, so as I said, this piece from here to here is essentially finished. All we have to do is decide what we're doing with this. And we get one shot at making this into what we're going to do, because we can bring it out, but we cannot bring it in. So whatever we're going to do, we're going to keep it relatively even. If at this point your wall is vastly uneven with lots of things wrong with it, just take your wire and cut it off, because there's really not much you're going to be able to do. Speaking of wire, all right, so sometime before I lay this down, I'm going to wire it. Instead of a kind of a dinner plate shape, which would go like this and then like that, I'm going to do a shape that goes like this and then just comes up into a shallow bowl. Okay, I'm going to probably take this down just a little bit more, but before I finish this form, I'm going to wire it at this stage, because if I lay this form down where the rim is lower, it's going to be very difficult to get underneath here with a wire and wire it. So we're just going to get in here and wire it. And if you lay it down and you forget to wire it, don't worry. You can wait about 20 minutes until the rim is completely okay. How did I do? Good. Okay. Now it's been wired. Now we'll just lay this out. So here we have maybe a 13 or 14 inch plate from 5 pounds of clay. Okay, thank you. Now, if at any time when you're making a plate, especially, not at any time, if towards the end of making a plate, you get it, everything is perfect and you've laid it out there and, see how slow I'm going here? This is important. You want to keep it slow. Now, many times when you're making a plate, you become confident and you say, you know what? I could improve this plate if I just did a little bit more work on it, just a tad more work on it. When it's at this stage, if I could just correct this, or if I could just correct that. And sometimes when you're doing that, the plate falls, just flops down. If that happens, don't spend any time trying to lift that rim back up or kind of get it back to behave like that. If the rim drops while you're making a plate, the best thing to do is to just slowly get that piece up off of the wheel and take that plate with the dropped rim and everything and go put it in front of the fan and let the clay stiffen up a little bit and come back. Once the clay has stiffened up a little bit, you can put this back on the wheel and you can take your rib, which is this tool, and you can slowly spin the wheel and you can get it under that rim and you can bring it back up and it will stand back up. But if you try and get that rim to come up while the clay is still soft, you'll just end up destroying the piece.